All right, how's it going, everybody? Welcome to the stream. I am Ian Douglas. I'm the author of Tech Interview Guide, and it's Thursday. It is August 19th, and I had a request on LinkedIn to do a chat about negotiations. So I just want to double check my audio real quick. Yep, we're good. Cool. And we got some folks in chat. So feel free to drop questions in chat as we go. I'm going to talk a little bit about the kinds of things we can negotiate, things that we probably can't negotiate. We're going to talk a little bit about stock equity and what that is and how you can sort of roll that into a compensation package. I'm going to go through kind of like typical sorts of things that you would see in a tech industry kind of like compensation package and so on. And eventually we'll get into some other information like how do we even find out like what kind of salaries companies offer and things like that, and how do you even start to negotiate those things. So definitely drop questions in chat as we go. I'm going to try to wrap up in about an hour, I think. Still recovering from the shoulder surgery. Appreciate everybody's patience on that. So I'm only typing one-handed, so I will be very clearly speaking names of websites. I will not be interacting in chat as much because it takes a lot longer to type with only one hand. But I will do what I can later on when I post this on YouTube. So if you're watching this on YouTube, check the description down below for various links and so on that we're going to be sharing kind of throughout the session tonight. And also throw a like and subscribe on there. That would be great. Cool. So let's dive in. So when it comes to negotiations, there are a handful of things that we have to really understand, like what goes into what we call a compensation package. Now, a compensation package or comp package is everything the company's offering you to come work for them. And Foregathers, by the way, thanks for the follow. Appreciate that. So there are a handful of things that you need to kind of take into account and things that you need to understand about what's in a compensation package to know what part of that can you even negotiate. So I'm going to kind of highlight kind of the main areas that a lot of tech companies are doing these days, and which parts of those may or may not be negotiable. Now, every company is going to be a little bit differently, or be a little bit different. So what I'm sharing here may not apply to every single company, but I'm going to try to keep this as generic as possible for the most part. So the first thing, of course, is the base salary. That's just dollars in the bank. You know, every 2 weeks or twice a month or however often they pay you. That's just the straight up paycheck that you get. Base salary is the most important thing, I would say, in a compensation package. Depending on the size of the company and the age of the company and whether they're public or not, equity can play a bigger part as you get into more like senior level roles. But as an entry level dev, it's all about the dollars. You want actual dollars in the bank. You don't want as much in the way of like stock options and equity when you're starting out in your career. And I'll kind of go into some reasons why. Again, these are just my own opinions. They're subject to change. But you know, and like I said, not everyone's going to agree. These are just my own perspectives. So definitely reach out, find other perspectives, you know, that are differing than mine or same as mine, and you'll kind of form your own opinion. But don't ever just listen to one person, especially on the internet. Don't just listen to me. Don't just listen to, you know, one person, like a career you know, counselor or anything like that. You have to listen to multiple people to kind of form like real opinions. So base salary, number one thing. From there, you can get into things like stock equity. And again, depending on whether the company is public or not, will depend on whether those stock options are things that you have to purchase or whether it's what we call a reserve stock unit or a public stock unit. Where the company is giving you like actual shares in the company that just convert immediately into cash. And so the type of equity will vary a little bit based on that. What's up, Jen Develops? Good to see you. The third one that we're going to talk about is just benefits. And these are things like healthcare, maybe home office perks, if there's like, you know, work remotely kind of thing or so on. But that's really more getting into perks. So benefits could be things like medical care, dental care, vision care, mental health care, like all those kinds of things that you would typically expect or hope that you would have a U.S. employer pay for so that you don't have to pay for it yourself. And so a lot of times that'll kind of be covered under what we just call benefits, which would typically be like medical, dental, and so on. But we'll talk about some of those. Those are typically like generally the employer will pay a portion of them. Some employers pay all of it for a single employee, but we'll go into more of that in a little bit. From there, other things that may be part of a compensation package could include like an annual bonus, some kind, or some sort of bonus structure. Not every company does. Some do. Some will do like a profit sharing kind of thing. Some will do like a quarterly bonus or a biannual or semi-annual bonus or an annual bonus. And again, that varies from company to company depending on what they're doing with their cash. Some companies are a little more forthcoming with sharing that cash with employees. Other companies want to like hang on to that cash. So again, everybody's different. Some companies will offer a signing bonus as part of a compensation package. This is like, sort of a last ditch effort of like, no, really, we really want you to work here. We'll give you like a bunch of cash up front. So you don't even have to wait for that first paycheck to come in. They'll just give you some dollars up front. Those are great. Just keep in mind that signing bonuses are also taxed. But we'll talk about that. And then the last one, again, kind of going into perks and what's involved in perks in a company. What kinds of perks could you expect? What kinds of perks are more common these days? So those are kind of the main, 6 kind of areas that we're going to talk about. So base salary, equity, benefits, annual bonus, signing bonus, and perks. Those would be like the main 6 things that we're going to get into. Jen Develops asks in chat, could we also go over how the compensation package may differ between startup versus large startup versus corp? Yeah, we'll absolutely get into that because that'll mostly play into the base salary as well as the equity. Most of those companies will do approximately the same things around benefits. It may just come into like how much of the benefits are they going to pay versus how much you have to pay. And then the bonus structure will obviously vary. Well, not obviously. The bonus structure will vary quite a bit depending on the size and the age of the company as well. There may not be any bonus structure depending on your role. So yeah, we'll definitely get into that. Thanks for asking, Jen. All right, well, let's dive in. I would say, so we already talked quite a bit about like just that base salary. That's just the straight up paycheck, dollars in the bank. How much are they actually paying you? That should be the number one thing that you negotiate is just base salary, because every sort of increase, every raise that you get is based on that salary. If you try to come up with like a whole compensation package of like salary and equity and all these other things, and you kind of calculate that out to a dollar amount, that's not the same as dollars in the bank, especially when it comes to equity. So dollars in the bank are the first and primary thing that you should be negotiating when you're trying to get a job or when they've offered you a job. Now, some companies will kind of, I hesitate to use the word lowball, but some of them will come with what seems to be a very conservative offer. And it may sound like they're trying to lowball you, or they're trying to like get you to agree to a very low salary amount. This is where knowing the cost of living in your area, how much money the company is willing to sort of pay for a particular role is really important. This may actually come up really early on in the interview process before you ever get that offer. They may ask up front, how much money do you want to make? That can come across in a lot of different ways. Primarily though, it will be presented like, what are your salary expectations for this job? Now, there are a handful of ways that you can kind of sort of put that off a little bit. There are guides online, and I'm going to show you some of my favorites here in a minute. There are some guides online that you can follow to try to figure out what kind of range that company may be offering for different roles, if you can find them specifically, or if you find their competition, like companies who they compete against, you may find out what they offer for salary, and you can kind of use those as a starting point. But I would say the first thing to do is never give just a single number. Like if I was interviewing Jen Develops, for example, and I said, hey, how much money do you want to make? If Jen just came back and said, I want to make $115,000 a year. Well, that's a single number. There's no range. There's no room, to kind of go high end, low end, anything like that. I've only been given a single specific number. And so as a company, that puts me in a tougher spot as far as agreeing to that negotiation. So part of what I'm going to be sharing tonight is from the company's perspective around negotiations. And again, this is just from my own experience as a hiring manager and trying to negotiate the business side of it. So when I talked about, sometimes those offers come in a little bit low, the reason here isn't necessarily that they are like biased or prejudiced against you in some way and they're just trying to, lowball you. Some companies will take into consideration like, hey, we're like a Bay Area company, but you live in the Midwest and it's not as expensive to live there, so we're going to pay you a little bit less. Some companies will actually do that. But my job as a hiring manager is to manage a budget, and I have a very specific amount of money that I have to spend on staff, and I have to basically go ask for money every time I want to hire somebody. And so I need to offer you as little as possible so that I have more room to hire more people later. And so my job is to get you to agree to a low number so that I have more money to hire other people with later, or maybe to give out as bonuses or use in some other way within my team. And so hopefully it's not just a biased thing like, oh, I don't like Jen, or, something was a little off about the interview, so I'm just going to like lowball that offer. That very rarely happens. I will say that companies can bias against you for various reasons, and that could be anything from experience level to gender to nationality and ethnicity, and all those things come into play. I'm going to be straight up honest with you. That can come into play depending on who the company is, who the people are. We as humans just carry natural unconscious bias. And sometimes we're just going to pull a number out of the air. This is where an HR department is actually kind of on your side, where they can make sure that, if they just hired somebody for $115,000 and then I interviewed Jen and I go to HR and go, okay, well, I want to hire Jen, but I only want to offer $105,000. Hopefully HR is like, why aren't you paying them the same? You just hired another person for the same role at the same level with the same kind of experience. Like, why aren't they making the same money? Hopefully the HR team is looking out for you in that case, but that's not always going to be the case. And so there's kind of a bit of a stigma around talking about dollars, like how much money do you actually make? And some employers try really hard to dissuade people or convince people not to discuss their salaries, because they don't want you to know that someone else on the team with the same level of experience and the same kind of background is making a different amount of money than you are. But it's important to know that kind of stuff. It's important for you to be empowered and equipped with that information. So in a minute, I'm going to show you some websites that I've used and I've seen in the past where you can kind of like look at those sorts of things. There are also what we call cost of living calculators that you can look up online as well. And these cost of living calculators can be really helpful, especially if you're going to relocate from one area to another, to try to figure out, okay, well, if I'm paying $600 a month for rent over here, it's going to be like $1,000 a month for rent if I move to that location. And so now you have to factor in, how much more money do I need to make on salary because my rent just went up $400 by moving, even though it's like the same size of apartment or whatever. Or if you're moving, like what's the moving expense going to be? What are the closing costs on a new house? Like how much does a house even cost there? I was looking at a news article today where they were saying there were 2 properties in Denver recently. I think it was through Zillow. I think Zillow reported that 2 houses in the Denver area went for $1 million over the asking price of the house. Like, that's how ridiculous the housing market is right now in August 2021. But I don't think that's going to last a very long time. But they were saying that there were, like in the reported time frame, there were also like 17 houses that went for $500,000 over the asking price, which is ludicrous. That's a whole other thing. But you have to know the cost of living difference between where you live now and where you want to live. If the company doesn't do remote, if they do remote, then that'll be different. And we'll talk about that as a negotiation thing later. So first and foremost, we got to talk about salary. So where do you find information about salary? Some people will go to like a site like Glassdoor. I generally recommend stay away from Glassdoor. They have some good information, but some of it's a little biased. And some of it's going to be really outdated. So the information that you find on Glassdoor may not be accurate. So just keep that in mind as you're doing this research. I do have a handful of other sites. Some of them are going to give you some interesting information there. And Jen asks in chat, how wide can the range be for roles, and what drives people to the top of the range? Ooh, good question, Jen. I really appreciate when you hang out in chat because you ask the good questions. The range can vary quite a bit depending on the role. I would say generally, I think in more modern times, I think companies are kind of coming up with what we call bands, which you could kind of think of like if you're looking overhead of like a swimming sort of meet at the Olympics. Everybody's got their lane kind of thing, and you can kind of think of those bands in a similar sense. So like an entry level band might be, say, 80K to 95K. And then the next band up might be 95 to 110. And so in my experience, those bands are generally like $10,000 to $20,000 difference between the bottom of the band and the top of the band. Where you sort of get an offer in between that will depend a little bit on the negotiation that you do. Now, when you get asked up front, like, how much money do you want to make? There's kind of this notion where, the first person that says a number loses. And there is validation in that. I think that, if I'm the recruiter and I ask you, how much money do you want to make? And you tell me I want to make between $110,000 and $120,000 a year. Now I've got that range. I can then go back and go, okay, well, they said 110. We were going to offer 130, but they'll take 110. So let's offer 110 and I get $20,000, to put back in my budget for something else. And so they'll start you typically at the low end of that, or depending on the company and the size and so on. Like I said, we'll get into, they may have to come in a little bit lower than that and see whether you'll negotiate back up to, like, no, I said 110 to 120. Like, I really want to make that as a minimum. They kind of want to see if you're going to hold to what you said. Like, if you said, I want to make 110 to 120, and they're like, well, we'll offer you 95. If you say, okay, then that tells the company right away, it's like, oh, you're kind of a pushover. And so you do have to be a little bit careful to, like, stick to your what you said. And there's one site that I'm going to show you where they talk about what they call walk away money. Like, what's the walk away price? Like, if the offer comes in at a certain point and they absolutely will not go above that, what's your walk away amount? Like, if I came in at 95 and you want to make 110 and your walk away is like 100. So you want to make 110 to 120, but your walk away is 100. If I offer you 95, you're going to walk away and just say, no, that's like way lower than what I was expecting. Thank you for your time. Now, some companies will try to figure out expectations in both directions, like how much do you expect versus how much am I willing to pay? They want to do that as early as possible because they also want to know, like, A, are you realistic with how much money you want to make? And B, is that even in the range that we as a company are willing to offer? So when they come at you and they say, how much salary are you expecting? There are ways that you can kind of defer the conversation, but at some point they're gonna kind of put the brakes on and say, hey, we really don't want to go forward without knowing that, your salary expectation is at least realistic for what we can afford to pay. And I've got like several anecdotes that I can kind of draw from here. I was a director of engineering at a company, and a person told us ahead of time, like while they were interviewing with us, hey, I've got another offer in hand. It's expiring. And I'm like, well, we really like you as a candidate, so tell me about the offer and we'll try to beat it. And so they told us the offer, and I beat it by like $5,000 a year. So it wasn't a lot, but I pushed on my side to say, like, no, this is a good candidate. I really want to get this extra 5K. And the company agreed, and so I made them the offer. Well, then they came back and they're like, well, by the way, I've also got this offer from, Fang Company, which was like double that salary. It's like, well, why did you even interview with us? Like, if you've already got this other offer from a Fang Company for making like ridiculous dollars, like, why even go through the hassle and trying to negotiate with us unless you're just practicing how to negotiate? But it left kind of a bad taste in our mouth around, like, who is this person? Like, what are they really up to? And so we had to start being a lot more cautious around, like, who are we interviewing and where else are they interviewing? And so we started asking questions up front around like where else are you interviewing, so that we know like whether we're going to get caught into that kind of thing later on. And so a couple of phrases that you can use to kind of push back on them, to either get them to share a salary range up front or to give you a little bit more data. You can say things like, it's a little bit early for that. I want you to evaluate my skills and tell me what you think, my skills are worth. That kind of phrasing can be really helpful if you're early in your career. It does hint at a little bit of unawareness of what your value is, though. So you do have to be a little bit careful. Like, you don't want to make it sound like I'm blissfully ignorant about how much money I should be making in this technical industry. And so I would like very much for you to tell me how much I should be making. You want to be careful. You don't want to phrase it that way. But you do want to say, like, I would rather get through the interview process and have the company evaluate my skill set, to be able to tell me, like, what my value is to the company. And then we can negotiate from there. But again, some companies are going to push back and say, well, we want to know that we're not wasting your time. Like, you're not going to come back and tell us you want $200,000 a year when we're only willing to pay like 90 to 100. We don't want to like spend all the time and go through all this hassle when your expectations are unreasonable. And from a business perspective, that's a reasonable thing from our side to kind of do. Another phrase that you can kind of throw back at them is say, like, I don't want to waste your time. So can you share a range with me that the company is willing to pay for this role? And I'll just let you know whether my expectation is within that range or close to that range, so that we can continue to move forward. And it'll come through the interview process that I'm a good candidate for this role, that I'm qualified for it, and then we can discuss from there. So you can use phrasing like that. Or you can say, like, I think if there's a mutual fit, we can come to an agreement of some kind. But right now it's a little bit early, things like that. Although that one, again, you're kind of sounding a bit wishy-washy, and they may kind of put the brakes on and go, no, really, we want to know, like, is your expectation reasonable? So from a business perspective, we don't want to move ahead with the interview if you're going to waste our time. Like, if you're going to go through the process and cost us a bunch of money to sit down, interview you, bring you sort of on site and use up our engineers' time to interview you and go through the process of making an offer and doing your background check and calling your references and spending, frankly, like hours and hours and hours trying to determine whether you're the right person for the job, only for you to come back and say, the salary that you're offering is like half of what I want to be making. You just wasted like everybody's time, including your own. And so there is some benefit of disclosing a range, at least up front. But again, it has to be a realistic range. And so let's talk a little bit about a couple of resources where you can find out some of this information. So I'm going to change my presentation view over here, and I'm going to talk about a couple of websites that I found that I wanted to share. This one's littered with ads. I don't endorse any advertising that you see on this page. Really, the important stuff is up here at the very top. And this is basically H-1B data. So it's h1bdata.info. And this website is basically a registry of, like, when a company wants to hire someone and sponsor an H-1B visa, they have to publicize the salary for it. And so this is a good way to find out, like, how much is this company willing to pay for a particular role. So we can come in here, for example, and we can say, well, let's go see what Netflix is offering. And I'm just going to click on them. And then from here, we can say, okay, well, let's look for like software developer, so software engineer. And we want to find them in like the Seattle area. Are they in Seattle, Washington for 2021? And let's see, do they have anything? So they don't have anything there. But I did recall seeing a few things for Los Angeles. So let's look for Los Angeles. And we'll search that. Also nothing there. Let's do Los Angeles, CA. Search. Also nothing. So let's see just any role that they have in Los Angeles. Nothing. This is the problem with search engines, is knowing kind of how to play their game. There we go. So we got a handful of things down here. Management content, senior software engineer, $142,000. So this is a role that Netflix had to publicize with a very specific salary. I mean, this is getting down to like dollars. And say, for a certified person to come and fill this job for an H-1B visa, we're willing to pay $142,000, roughly. Let's round it up to 143,000. Now, because that's a single dollar value, again, they're not giving a range, but you could say, well, if I want to go work at Netflix, is that within the range of what I want to make as a senior engineer? Well, as a senior engineer in LA, 140 grand is not very much. I would be aiming more for like 180, 190 in LA. LA is expensive. Everywhere in Southern California is expensive. 140K is not very much. And there is some, there is some bias and some prejudice against H-1B visas because you're coming from another country and they're sort of like doing you a favor to let you come to America, blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes H-1B visa salaries can be a little bit low because the company is sponsoring you to come to the country. So keep that in mind. I would take it with a slight flake of salt. But this gives you a starting point at least. So h1bdata.info is one place that you can go look that up. Now, if they're not a public company, if they're more like small startup, I like angel.co. So angel.co. And they've got a site, angel.co/salaries. And you can come in here and you can basically say, okay, I want to look for a full stack engineering role. And I'm in the Denver area. So let's do Denver. And I do Python development. And you can kind of see like, okay, well, there's 2 matching jobs and it's approximately $120,000 for a full stack. But that's not even looking at level. But we can see that there was one job between 90 and 100 and one job between 140 and 150. And so whether you click through and look at those jobs or not is up to you, but this will at least give you some idea of range, depending on the company and depending on your experience level and factors and so on. So again, this is just going back to the first of 6 points. This is just paycheck in the bank. This isn't equity. This isn't benefits. This isn't perks. This is just straight dollars in the bank to think of while we're here. Jen asked another good question in chat. What if the recruiter won't give you a range? I would keep pushing on it and just say I'm not willing to move forward on the interview process until I know that I'm not wasting my time either. Like, I don't want to go through the whole interview process and find out that you're not willing to pay my expectation. At which point they're going to push back and say, well, what is your expectation? So somebody's got to give at some point. Ideally, they're going to give. That's really what we want to get to. We want to get to the point where you say I really want to know what you're willing to pay. What range of salary are you willing to pay? And what are the determiners or the determinations? Determiners, words are hard. What are the determining factors for that range? So, this role here, 140 to 149K, what's the difference between 140 and 149? Obviously it's $9,000 in difference, but what would the skill level be? Or why would one candidate get 140 and another candidate get 149? Because the next year when they go for that raise and you get that, 5% bump or 10% bump, whatever that increase is going to be, it's based off that base salary. It has nothing to do with compensation and benefits and perks and the other 5 things that we talked about. Your future raise within that company is based on this starting salary. And so this starting salary is everything. To kind of start the whole compensation package, you have to negotiate cash in the bank first and then negotiate other things. But as I kind of hinted at, not everything's going to be negotiable. So we do need to talk about some of that. So that was site number 2. So the first one was H1B data. The second one is angel.co/salaries. And the third one I want to show is TripleByte. TripleByte actually has really good data and it's really up to date. And you can find out a lot of interesting information here. So let's go look for another full stack job. Let's say you're brand new in the industry and the company size is let's do small size companies. So 50 to 250 people. So again, depending on your level of experience, TripleByte says 130K, but where? Because 130K in the Bay Area may be a starting salary for entry level roles. But in Denver, for example, you're probably not going to make 130K as a starting salary as a fresh grad or coming out of a boot camp or something like that. Your chance of making 130K are pretty low. You're more likely to make 80K, 90K in Denver. Other areas, other metro areas where the cost of living within the state is much lower. And I'm thinking northern states, so Montana through Michigan kind of thing. Those salaries are going to be even lower because the cost of living there is not as high. And so some companies will adjust their salary based on where you are. Not everybody will, but a lot of the salary, part of the reason that the Bay Area salaries in San Francisco Bay Area are so inflated is because it was ridiculously expensive to live there. I remember a couple of DevRel guys that I knew through SendGrid. One of them was saying that a friend of his was renting a place downtown San Francisco. His share of the rent was like thousands of dollars a month to rent one bedroom of a 4-bedroom place, and he was paying thousands, like $3,000 to $4,000 a month, just for his share of the rent to live downtown San Francisco. So this is why you've got to make $300,000, $400,000 in the San Francisco area, because the cost of living there was just stupid. I would much rather live in Colorado, where I can pay half of that on a mortgage on a house and have my own space and not have roommates. Although I have a roommate now. I've got a wife and kids. They're kind of constant roommates, as well as this fluffy thing that loves to pass out at my feet. And so to see that TripleByte is saying 130K is a little bit misleading, because they don't tell you where. And so that can be a little bit, of a nuance. Also, difference between a boot camp grad, college degree, and then if you go through like the TripleByte sort of certifications and whatever, they're like, oh, you'll make so much more if you go through our certifications. But again, it depends on where. So they're showing you 3 major metro areas, and that's the only downside to TripleByte, is they really only focus on a couple of metro areas. So you do have to keep that in mind. But those are the 3 sites that I would start with. And so if you're in one of those 3 metro areas, like San Francisco, New York, or Seattle, TripleByte will be a great resource for you. They're constantly doing surveys and things like that with folks. And so it's a good place to get that information. Otherwise, if they're a smaller startup, I would say like between 30 to 200 people, angel.co, may be a good kind of place to go check what a salary range would be just for someone with your skill and your level of experience. And then, if you know that the company sponsors H-1B visas, and they'll usually say in the job post, like, sponsorship is available or not available. If it's not available, they're probably not going to be on the H-1B website. But it's worth looking at. It's worth checking out. There are other resources. These aren't the only ones, but these would be the first 3 that I would try to draw from for that. Go to attitude. I'm full stack. Would be happy with half of that salary. Yeah, no kidding. In a depressed area in Canada, our salaries are materially different. Yeah, I agree. When I lived in Canada, the 2 hotspots were Calgary and Ottawa. Ottawa was all telecom, and Calgary was like varying tech, mostly around petroleum technology because of tar sands and stuff out in Alberta. Since then, like Vancouver, exploded, and Toronto also exploded as tech centers. And so there's a wider variety of those kinds of roles. But if you're living in the prairies or something like that, yeah, you're not going to make the same kind of salaries if you're living close to a metro area. But that's going to be the same as if you're in the States as well. The closer you are to a metro area, generally the salaries are going to bump up a little bit. Yeah, if you're not in any of those metro centers or metro areas, then again, it depends on the company. Some companies are willing to say, like, hey, we're just going to offer everybody the same salary, so there's no discrepancy and so on. Everybody kind of gets paid the same. One of the very first streams that we did for Tech Interview Guide, this whole thing, we were talking about companies that say, oh, well, everybody that starts, they all make the same salary, and we just don't negotiate on that initial compensation package because we want everybody to start at the same salary. And I think I had Jonan on the show at the time, and Jonas Scheffler's a great guy. Go check out his stream Wednesday nights. He's got a whole crew of folks, and it's the Jonan Show. They stream on Wednesdays on Twitch. And Jonan and I were kind of going back and forth, and he's like, no, that's all BS. If they say they don't negotiate, that's just because they don't want to. They just want to try to lowball you, get you in for minimal dollars. But I was working at Turing at the time when we were dealing with a company that said we don't negotiate for entry-level devs, and they really meant it. And we were able to actually see the job offer letters from the students, and so we could verify that, yeah, they're all offering the exact same salary, exact same benefits package to everybody, no matter what. And so in that particular case, we knew for fact that this company was not adjusting things and just labeling it as we don't negotiate for that initial role. But there are companies out there who will say oh no, everybody makes the same. Honest, we promise everybody's making the same dollar, and they really don't. But you don't really know that unless you're willing to have that conversation with other people. And so it's important that as you're doing your networking and doing your outreach, that's one of the first questions that you're asking. Like, hey, are you comfortable talking about salary? Is anybody else in the company comfortable talking about salary? Because I want to know that if I apply there, that I'm making the same money as everybody else when I'm bringing this, this level of skill, that I'm not being lowballed, or, I'm being paid extra because I'm a white male and I'm going to get paid more than you coming in as a new engineer, than you who have been here for years and years and years. Like, I want to make sure that you're also treated equitably if I get hired there. And so it's important that as employees that we feel comfortable talking about salaries and so on. Mary, 12345, thanks for the follow. Appreciate it. The links for the website, I will post them on YouTube. I've only got one usable arm these days. And so just real quick, I'll just speak them out for you. h1bdata.info is the first one. The second one is angel.co/salaries. And the third one is triplebyte.com. And their URL is triplebyte.com/software-engineer-salary. So again, very specific around like technical things. When I post this up on YouTube later, I'll actually like type out the links, but right now I've only got one hand, so I can't easily like copy and paste those into chat and so on. So apologies for that. Going back to Dota 2 attitude, I have 2 years experience in web dev, and that's kind of stretching it, I assume. Trying for higher salaries at that experience level is too risky? No. I mean, you've got experience. 2 years experience is 2 years experience. As a hiring manager, though, I want to know, like, is it like, did you do the same thing for 2 years, or did you get progressively better? Like, what were your responsibilities over those 2 years, and did you do something better? Did you tackle like bigger and bigger projects? Did you learn more and more things over the 2 years? Or did you do the exact same thing for 2 years and, you're faster at it, but you're still kind of at that junior level? And the way that I've heard it phrased in the past of, I've got 4 years experience. Well, do you have 4 years of progressive experience, or do you have 1 year of experience 4 times? And so that's really the differentiator. And our interview process is going to help sort of flush that out. Like, did you actually progress in your skill over those 2 years in your case? And so they're gonna want to know, like, what kinds of things did you do when you first started out? Now, what kinds of things are you doing 2 years later? How have you progressed in that? Or are you still kind of at that same level? Those are the kinds of things that they'll sort of flush out as part of the interview. I went from not building a website for my dad to being paid to do an inventory management system in Java and TypeScript. Cool. All solo developer work. Great. So, I mean, going from zero experience to like building out a whole platform, that's significant. And so, yeah, you've got 2 years of progressive experience. At the same time, if it was all solo and you were the only developer, then as a hiring company, my worry is going to be, well, who coached you? Like, were you literally just copying and pasting stuff off the internet and then like fiddling with it, massaging it until it worked? Are you what we call a full Stack Overflow developer, as they say? Are you just looking things up on Stack Overflow and like trying it till it works? Or did you actually have somebody coaching you and mentoring you and telling you how to make it better, how to make it secure, how to make it fast? That's the benefit to working at a company where you've got mentorship around you, is that you're going to get better at that job, not just that you're figuring it out. Figuring it out is important. I don't want to downplay that in the least. Being able to figure out a problem and implement a solution is critical. But they're also going to want to know that you've had good mentorship over those 2 years as well. It's nothing against you if you haven't had that mentorship. I'm a big proponent of self-learning myself. I've been doing this for 25 years professionally, over a decade prior to that, more than a decade. I've been coding since 1982. Wow, almost 40 years. That's ridiculous. August next year will be 40 years that I've been coding, and I'm only 47. So I've been coding for a minute. But, the first like 10, 12, 13 years, whatever, that I was coding, it was all on my own, learning from books, trying to do it all on my own. It wasn't really until I got into the workplace where I had people telling me like, okay, that works, but like, here's how to make it better, or here's how to make it more efficient, or here's some things that would make it more secure or more resilient or scalable, whatever. That's where that progression of skill like kicks into high gear. And so it's totally okay that you learned all this on your own for those 2 years. Absolutely great. If you have had mentorship though, I would definitely speak to that as part of the interview process so that they know that you've had other people help influence your learning and influence your growth as well. So it's just something to keep in mind there. Had a coach from Silicon Valley. Great. Passed code reviews. Yep. Awesome. Cool. So base salary, that's number one. So kind of going back to the list of things to kind of pay attention to, we talked about like base salary and equity. What were some of the other things? Go back to my notes here. Benefits package, bonus structure, and then other perks. So let's talk about equity real quick. Again, if the company's public, they're going to have different kinds of equity than if they are not yet public. So if they're a private company, pre-IPO kind of company, they may not even offer stock options. Hopefully they do. It's kind of the norm in the tech industry to have some sort of stock option equity kind of package, because they know that, you know, salary is fine, but they really want you bought in. They want to keep you around for a while. And so there's a type of stock option called an incentive stock option, ISO. And if the company's still private, any stock options you get are probably going to be ISOs. It's an incentive to stick around. And I may do a whole stream on just like my experience with stock options and things like that. When I've bought them, when I haven't bought them, how I know when to buy them or not. My current CEO, he keeps teasing me all the time. So I worked at this company, and then I went and taught at Turing, and then I went back to that company. And when I worked there the first time, you know, the joke in a startup is like, you know, 9 out of 10 startups fail. And his joke was like, well, if Ian buys the stock options in us, then we're going to succeed. Because I'd had a good history of, you know, investing money in stock options at companies that actually succeeded. Not to the tune of like millions of dollars or anything ridiculous like that, but I've been successful at it. And so I bought my stock options. Next thing I know, they raised like $38 million round of funding. And so, you know, he emailed me the day they got their funding. He's like, hey, just want to say thanks for investing in us, because, you know, if you hadn't, we might not have succeeded as a company. But equity can be a big thing. And sometimes the equity will outweigh the salary, especially later in your career. Because companies aren't necessarily just going to say, well, here's $400,000 as far as like money in the bank goes. Some salaries will kind of peak out, in my experience, between $200,000 to $250,000, and the rest of the compensation package will be all stock or equity or you know, reserve stock units or things along those lines. And so, in my experience, salaries kind of peak out at that point. I'm just going to change my my presentation back to this one. So yeah, so just kind of going back to equity. So equity, as you sort of progress in your career, it will make up a bigger and bigger portion of that compensation package, to where you might make like $200,000 to $250,000 as like money in the bank, but then you might make $500,000 worth of equity on top of that. Now, depending on the type of equity and the size of the company and the age of the company and their exit plan and all that kind of stuff, that could actually be cashable, like stock options, or it might be the ISO type where you have to pay the company to actually buy those shares, and then you have to hold on to them until they go public or get bought or buy them back from you or something along those lines to actually make money back on your investment. So, you know, it will vary quite a bit. And like I said, maybe I'll do a whole stream sometime. I'll get a couple of folks on. We can just talk about equity and kind of our experiences with that sort of thing. From there, kind of going back into points 3 and 4, we were talking about like annual bonus and signing bonus. Signing bonus is sometimes a really easy one to ask for. So if they can't match you on salary, you may say, well, I was really hoping to make X. You know, would you be willing to do like an upfront like signing bonus or whatever to kind of get me there for the year? Keep in mind, though, that salary bonus will not play into any subsequent raise that you get from the company. And so if you want to make $100,000 a year and they say, we can only pay you 90, and you say, okay, well, cool, can you give me a 10K signing bonus? And they say, sure, it's like a one-time cash payout. So technically in that first year, you've made $100,000 in cash. But that second year, any raise you get is going to be based on the $90,000, not the $100,000 total cash that you got in the bank. Minus taxes. So any any upfront signing bonus, moving bonus, like relocation pay or anything like that, is also going to get taxed. So keep that in mind. If they say, yeah, we'll give you $5,000 signing bonus, given like typical tax rate of say 25 to 30%, you're going to lose a third of that money just to taxes. So don't spend it like you've got $5,000 in the bank. You need to spend it like you've got like $3,500 in the bank, because the rest of that's going to go to the IRS when you pay your taxes next year. So keep that in mind. Any signing bonus that you get up front is also going to be taxed. Some companies will say, like, if you leave within a certain amount of time, you have to pay back that signing bonus. And so you have to make sure that you read that employment contract very carefully. If they do offer you a signing bonus, or if you request one, they may change the offer letter and contract to specifically outline, like, what happens if you leave within 90 days? Do you have to pay that back? So be really careful about what you do with that cash, because you don't want to, like, say, you know what, this job's not working out, I'm going to bail. And they're like, all right, well, we want that $10,000 back. Now you literally owe them $10,000 and they will fight you for it because that's cash in their bank account. So, make sure that if you get a signing bonus, that you read the contract very carefully around that kind of thing. Someone mentioned in chat, ISOs sound like a bad deal. Not really. ISOs are actually a good way to kind of keep people around. And so typically you have to wait a year before you get to buy any of them, because they want you to stick around. They want you to kind of learn about the company and learn what kind of, what goes on. They don't want you to bail within the first year. If they're making the effort to hire you, they want you to stick around. That's why it's called an incentive stock option, because they want you to stay. After that year, you can typically buy like 25% of however many shares they offered you, but you have to pay them cash for each of those shares. And that's something called a strike price, where when they make that offer and they say, hey, we're going to offer you like 10,000 shares in the company, one of the first questions you need to ask them back is like, what's the strike price of those options? And they should be able to tell you that immediately. That is not a number they can make up. That number comes from a third-party financial audit that the company goes through, where they kind of take a look at the past performance of the company, as well as typically the next 12 months of projected, financials about the company. And they say, okay, well, this company's worth $20 million, and the company has 20 million shares. You're getting 10,000 of those, so every share is worth $1. So those ISOs now have a strike price of $1. You could look at that and say, okay, well, these shares are worth exactly face value. I've got 10,000 of them worth $1 each. So this on top of my salary is like an extra $10,000. Ideally, though, they're going to go public someday, maybe $15, $20 per share. Hopefully. I mean, that's kind of everybody's dream when they go public, to kind of get that $15 to $20 price. Well, if they go public at $20, you only have to pay them $1, because you're locked in on that contract price, that strike price of $1. So whenever you buy them, you're only paying them $1 per share. So if they go public later at $20, you just made $19 in profit by buying those shares. And then there's usually like a lockup period before you can sell them on the market. You may also owe some taxes on that sort of quote unquote profit early on. Everybody's tax situation is a little different. So you do need to research, based on your income level and your tax level and all that kind of stuff, how that's going to play into it. So a couple of things there. As far as the negotiation topic, over the whole night, I would never encourage somebody to negotiate less base salary for more equity. Don't give up real dollars for maybe dollars. Never ever do that. Never give up real money for fake money. Because really, when you think about it, I got your stock options right here. How many stock options do you want? Like it's literally, it's worth Kleenex. It's not worth any money at all until the company has some kind of exit event where they actually make some money. And the first people that are going to get paid back on that money are their investors, and then you. So those are very careful things you have to take into consideration when you're buying those stock options. I think I'll do a whole talk about stock options sometime. But you can negotiate for more equity. You can negotiate to give up some of that equity. And I generally recommend that if you're newer in your career. But I would caution, don't negotiate away all of it. So if they offer you, say, 10,000 shares and you're brand new in the industry, What I've coached people to do in the past is say, well, I'm new in the industry. I've got student loans to pay back, or I've got, things going on. I'm not sure that investing is the right move for me right now. So what I'd like to do, could I give back like half of those stock options and get more money towards like a professional development budget? So if they have a professional development budget, let's say they give you like $500 a year for class tuition reimbursement. And you say, okay, well, you offered me 10,000 stock options at $1 strike price. So if I give you back half of those, that's technically like $5,000 worth, even though it's Kleenex money. It's not really worth that, but you want them to know that you still put a value on their stock. And so you could say, could I give back half of that and get like an extra $1,000, $2,000 because maybe I want to go to a conference with some travel expenses or something like that. Like, could I negotiate back some of that equity? If you negotiate all of it back and say, nah, I don't want any of your equity, forget it, then that sort of sends a signal to them that you're not even willing to stick around for that first year. Like, there's a reason about the incentive stock options, as we said. And so if you negotiate back all of it, it kind of sends a signal that you don't want to stay. And so it is kind of a balancing act that you need to do there. But I think you can negotiate back some of it. If you're happy with the salary and everything else about the compensation package and you want more, you can ask them for more equity. They literally make equity up out of thin air. They literally sit down and go, I think I would like 10 million shares in the company as we form this company. And then later on, when they do a round of funding or something, they may say, you know what, let's increase that to 20 million instead of 10 million. And now suddenly everything changes as far as like the dilution and so on and so on. So you can always ask for more equity. You may be able to negotiate back some of the equity, but you don't want to negotiate back all of it. So that would be an important thing. Let's kick over to chat. So Mary, 12345. I just graduated a boot camp, recently had an interview. Congrats. I was asked how much I would like to get paid. I responded with entry level will get 75 to 80. I'd like to take 70. I'm looking at the average on the sites I suggested. It said 90 plus. So if you've already told them 70 to 80, you've kind of locked yourself in there, or 75 to 80. If you told them, I know that the average is 75 to 80, but I'm willing to take 70, you've lowballed yourself. They may come back and say, you said 70, but come on, like you're worth 80, 85, depending on your experience level, what you bring to the team, other relevant experience that you're bringing to the company, other background and experience and so on, as well as metro area, which we talked about, I think, right before you joined or followed. So I knew that you were here. And so a lot of those things factor into kind of that base salary component. But if you've already told them, like, I'm willing to only take 70, now you've given me like full permission to make you an offer at $70,000. And if you say like, nah, I really want more money, I can come back and say, you told me you wanted 70. Like, it kind of takes away a bit of your negotiating power. But kind of as things progress, you can say, you know what, now that I've gone through the interview process, I realize I'm bringing a lot more to the team. I would like to adjust that and say, the average entry-level engineer is making 75 to 80 because of what I'm bringing to the team. I'd like to be making between 80 and 90. And they're going to say, well, that's a big leap from 70, but you don't get what you don't ask for. So you can negotiate a little bit higher for that. And I'd be willing to help you out with that. If you want to contact me, you can reach out. It's just go to techinterview.guide and you'll see contact information on there. And you're welcome to ping me and we can chat about that offline. And then Dota kind of mentioned, kind of going back to stock options, like buying into a startup that's going to fail 90% of the time. Yeah, it's risky. And that's typically why I tell people, like, early in your career, don't even think about equity. I typically coach new entry-level folks in the industry to say, like, think about stock options as a paycheck you might get eventually after you've left the company, maybe, if they succeed. But that's only if you invest in the company. So it is something to be really careful about. And I usually tell, like, students coming out of boot camps, coming out of programs like Turing, like, don't even bother with equity. Like early in your career, don't even bother. Wait until you get some experience and you actually look at the leadership and you understand like what signals do you look for to go, yeah, this company is actually worth investing in, and then make a decision. If you're not really sure, what you could do is figure out, okay, well, if I've got 10,000 stock options and my strike price is $1 each, those are going to like sort of get earned or vested, as we call it, over 4 years. So that's 2,500 a year. That's approximately 200 a month. So approximately 200 shares per month if you were to buy them every month. So put $200 in a bank account, like literally open a brand new bank account and just put $200 a month in that bank account and don't touch the money. Or put it, even better, put it in an investment account where you can at least grow the money faster than like 0.000%, whatever, that you're going to get from a bank. But don't touch that cash. Later on, like if you stick around that company for a year or two and you decide to kind of move on from that company, you have like a window of opportunity to buy those shares, and you can make the decision at that point, hey, I've got the cash in the bank. I could buy those shares if I want to, because now I actually understand where the company's going. And yes, I believe in the company. Yes, I'm going to make that investment. You don't have to come up with that cash like out of your pocket. You've already got it sitting in a bank account. And if you decide not to, you got a bunch of money sitting in a bank account. Like take a couple extra weeks off in between jobs or take a vacation or something, like treat yourself, invest that money back into yourself. So some things to think about there. So we talked about base salary, we talked about equity, we talked about signing bonus. Some companies I mentioned may give some kind of annual bonus or quarterly bonus. They may label it as profit sharing. It's not as common in the tech industry, but it could happen. And it's not something that you can really ask for, and it's not typically something that you can negotiate either. If they do have some kind of bonus structure, it's company-wide, and you're not going to be able to negotiate that. Same thing with benefits packages. You're generally not going to be able to negotiate that, because if they allow you to negotiate and they didn't allow someone else to negotiate, they've effectively discriminated against that other person. And so that other person could come back with a lawsuit and say, well, you just let Jen Develops negotiate for an extra week of PTO and I didn't get that extra week of PTO. Like, is it because I'm white? Is it because I'm a dude? Like, or whatever. Like they could totally cry discrimination. And so it is something that companies will generally say like, nah, that kind of stuff we can't negotiate. Same thing with like 401k plans. If they do like a matching percentage on a 401k plan, that's also not negotiable. You typically can't push back and say, okay, well, I like that you match 1%, but I'd really like to get 5%. Excuse me. They're not going to be like, okay, we'll give you 5%, but everybody else only gets 1%. That's not fair, because now you're getting extra money. And so that would be a kind of thing of like, well, I appreciate the 1%. Excuse me. Is there any possibility that company-wide you could evaluate like increasing that over time? You could always ask, but it's typically not going to be part of a compensation package where they say, yes, we will give you a higher percentage match on your 401k. That kind of thing has to be company-wide. Same thing with benefits packages around like medical and how much of the medical they cover. That's typically not going to be a negotiable thing on an individual basis. Those kinds of things are going to be locked in for everybody. Like some companies, they'll say if you're like a single employee, like single person, like you're not married, don't have a partner, don't have dependents, things like that, they will pay 100% of your medical, dental, vision, like whatever. They're going to pay 100% of that. If you have a partner, family, whatever, they'll pay like some percentage or maybe 0% of their share. And if you want like family benefits, then the rest of that comes out of your paycheck. The last company I worked at when I was at Turing, they paid 100% of everything for everybody in your family, which was amazing for someone like me where I'm married and I got kids. For a single person who wasn't married, didn't have kids, that benefits package is still valuable to them because they still had 100% of their benefits package covered. But if you kind of weigh them versus each other, I actually came out way ahead of others because they paid 100% of my entire family benefit package where this other person didn't. I have heard of other people also negotiating like, hey, part of your benefits package is, 6 weeks of family leave or, whatever. Like if your kid gets sick or if your kid has something going on at school, you can take a day off and go to your kid's school for whatever. But, I'm single. I don't intend to ever have kids. Like, what can I get instead? I have heard of companies allowing people who like not as official as like I will sign an affidavit stating I never intend to have children kind of thing, because I don't think they can make you do that. But I have heard of some companies go, if you don't want to have kids, if that's not part of your plan in life, whatever, we will give you something similar. Like we may give you a couple of extra PTO days or something like that. There was also a company I heard of, I forget if they were in Japan, but they basically said, if you smoke cigarettes, you get typical like smoke breaks or whatever. But if you don't smoke cigarettes, we're going to give you like an extra day of PTO every month, because that's like the cumulative amount of break time that other people take to go outside and smoke a cigarette. Like just interesting things like that, where they absolutely want it to be like equitable and even all across the board. Like some companies will actually think differently about that kind of stuff. You can ask, but those things are like really fringe, like very niche kind of things. I wouldn't expect every company to have those kinds of perks, but every company is going to be a little bit different as far as the things that they're going to offer. And so as far as benefits package, again, that's going to be like medical, dental, vision. They may have mental health care. They may have like supplemental life insurance. Typical in the tech industry to be like short-term, long-term disability. Like if this shoulder thing kept me out for like months and months and months, I'd probably be going on like short-term disability or something where they pay a portion of my paycheck instead of my entire paycheck. Because I feel really guilty right now making a full paycheck when I've only got like half of my arm or half of my the use of my body to actually do my work. But that's an Ian struggle. That's not for everybody. So that pretty much covers salary, equity. We talked about benefits. We talked about bonuses. Some companies will do quarterly, annual bonuses. Some don't. Other perks. So when we get into things like work from home arrangements, some companies will say like, we're going to give you a stipend to work from home. So we're going to give you like X number of dollars to like set up your equipment at home. You want an extra monitor, you want a standing desk, you want like a nice comfy chair. Like we're going to give you some amount of money. And that might be where you just go buy it and then you expense it back up to a cap or something like that. It typically won't be like, oh yeah, we'll just give you a check for $1,000 and you just, go out for really expensive sushi or something. It'll typically be like, no, you go buy the things and then you expense it, or we're gonna like you send us links for what you want and we're gonna purchase it on a company credit card and then we'll just have it shipped to your house or something like that. Every company's a little bit different about that. Excuse me a sec. Stay hydrated. My voice is a little raspy too because I'm trying out dictation software, so I'm talking more during the day than usual. Excuse me. Goodness. And so different kinds of perks like that may be negotiable. But again, some of those things may not be as negotiable. If you live in an urban area, for example, you might be able to negotiate like, hey, could I expense like one lunch a week or something like that? Like if the company has like team lunch day, you could negotiate like, well, if I'm working remote, can I do like a delivery food order or something like on that day of the week? So I still kind of feel included in like, team lunch day. Some companies be like, yeah, cool. That's something that we could totally expense. Those kinds of things you may be able to negotiate. Negotiating for professional development budget, those kinds of things you may be able to negotiate as well. Now, how you do that is going to depend a lot on actually getting the offer, taking time to think about the offer, looking at all of the complexities of all of the things in that offer, and trying to determine which parts of this are going to be negotiable, which parts are not negotiable. You always want negotiation to be kind of give and take. What can I give you to get something else? You never want to start a negotiation with, well, I want because whatever. Now, I say that, and I'm going to kind of backtrack on those words a little bit. If you want to negotiate for more salary, you want to negotiate for something more, you do need to spin it as to why you deserve it. But you don't want to just come back and say, that's not enough salary, I want more salary. And just leave it at that. You have to explain why you deserve that salary. And you also want to just exude a lot of gratitude and say I really appreciate this offer. There's a lot about this that I really like. I do want to talk about the base salary because I'm bringing such and such experience. And there are whole guides out there that you can follow. And I am going to share one more website. So let me switch over to that presentation. And this is someone that I've actually spoken with on the phone a couple of years ago. His name is Josh. And he wrote a book called Fearless Salary Negotiation. And it's a whole website, just add .com, fearlessSalaryNegotiation.com. It's a book you can buy on Amazon. And he walks you through everything. Like it's several chapters long, but he walks you through absolutely everything around like how to negotiate that offer, down to like email templates that you can like fill in the blank and like send over. You want to customize, as much as possible, but he'll walk you through the whole process. You can actually get coaching from him specifically on things. But even just reading his book is fantastic. I highly recommend his book. It's got some really good points in there. He's also got a newsletter. Like if you buy the book, you can get on his newsletter and he'll just send updates periodically, where he'll talk about case studies and talk about like, oh, I just helped so-and-so negotiate and this was their circumstance. And here's how I coached them to like talk about this aspect of their background or this aspect about the experience that they're bringing to the company and how that got them like an extra $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. Negotiation, absolutely expected in the tech industry. The tech industry expects you to negotiate. Other people will typically not advocate for you. You need to advocate for yourself. And so you do need to be aware of your self-worth. You do need to be aware of salaries in your area, salary range based on your experience. Add more salary if you're bringing additional experience to the company. All of those things matter. And so Josh's book actually does a really good job kind of walking you through a lot of that stuff. I've also helped lots of people negotiate for, $10, $15, $20,000 more as well. And I know other folks, like folks on Jonan's channel, for example, they've helped folks as well with negotiations. So definitely reach out to people. Like people are willing to help with this kind of stuff because it is expected. If they just say like, here's your offer and you're like, cool, thanks. See you in a couple of weeks when I, join the company. That may actually catch them a little bit off guard. Like, oh, they didn't negotiate for anything. Take some time, read through it, read through the offer completely. Make sure you understand everything. Ask questions about the offer. If you have any questions whatsoever, you have to be clear on everything that they're offering you as part of that compensation package. And you don't want to leave money on the table, as we say. Like you don't want to walk away and not negotiate, knowing that you could have increased that base salary $10,000, $15,000 because that next year's raise is based on that base salary. Nothing at all to do with signing bonuses, annual bonuses, equity levels. None of that is going to factor into the raise that you get next year. You have to negotiate that base salary first and foremost, and then you can negotiate all the other things. Cool. Let's head back over to chat. What if they bust? If they go bust, you lose the amount. So kind of going back to the idea of stock options. Yeah, if the company folds, if they don't have a successful exit, you lose the money that you invest. You don't get it back. So that does suck. The strike price is, it's not that it's regulated, but it is a third-party audit to come up with that. And then from Jen, if you're really excited to work for a pre-seed startup, I think maybe, but they don't have enough money in the budget for your target-based salary other than Kleenex money, what could you negotiate for? If they are early enough to where, and I've had this happen, I've worked at sort of Series A, pre-Series A kinds of companies where they haven't got a lot of cash in the bank and they're in a huge hustle to get something out the door to start making money. It's a lot harder to negotiate. Like when I first worked at Stream, it was harder to negotiate at that time. They actually offered like, here's your offer. You have 3 different salary points with 3 different equity points. And the lower the salary, the higher the equity goes. And I'm like, well, based on the salaries that you're offering here, like I need to take the top one plus negotiate because, it's like anything less than that, I'm actually taking like a massive pay cut to take this job. And so those kinds of things you have to like pay attention to up front. If they're early enough that you don't have a lot of negotiation room, I mean, you can take equity, but you have to be really ready to work really hard and really hustle for a company that early in their history. That's not something that I would generally take very lightly. I think that it's important that you understand like the ins and the outs of the company before you make decisions like that. I would want to find out a whole lot more information about the company and the direction that they're going before trying to negotiate much farther on that. Because you're not going to be able to negotiate very much else. You might be able to negotiate time off, but again, if they're that early in startup world, they're hustling all the time, and getting time off might be tricky because they're going to have deadlines all the time, and they're trying to push, and they're trying to come out with new product and get product released, and all that kind of stuff. And it may be harder to actually get time off. So those would be things that would be harder to kind of track. As far as like something negotiable, like you could try to negotiate for time off and they'd be like, yeah, you can take, we'll give you extra PTO. You're never going to be able to take it though, because you're always so busy. Because if the company is that small and that sort of strapped for cash, it's not like they're hiring 20 engineers to go build the thing. They may have 4 engineers building the thing, and you're working, 10 plus hours a day. I've been there. I've worked at startups where I'm doing like 90 hours a week for like months and months and months at a time. And then like right on the verge of burnout, I'm like, I got to take a few days off and recharge, and then you're back at it again. It's a tough life. It's not for everybody. And so I would say if you're thinking about going to a company that small and that strapped, you need to have a cash reserve where you can draw from that to kind of offset the salary and hope, like really hope, that the equity is going to like make up for it in the long run. But if the company's that early as well, I mean, it takes several years for a company to grow. Like I want to say the average is like 10 years from like starting the company to like maybe going public. If you're kind of at that seed stage and you get that equity, you might have to wait a decade to see a return on that investment. So it's super risky. That's kind of why I was saying, like, if you're early in your career, it's not worth it. Like, don't even think about equity at that point. Cool. My mentor told me if you ask for a certain salary, you better live up to what you asked for. That's something that I've kind of had in my own head over the years too. But and I think what I've come to realize this year is you bring value to a job above and beyond what that salary is. When I worked at Turing, for example, I made almost twice what other instructors made. Like literally like double the salary of some other instructors. And at face value, we're all teaching the classes, we're all putting in the same sort of hours, like preparing and teaching and doing the recordings and helping students and doing assessments and the evaluations and all that kind of stuff. And then we all, kind of take the same kind of break and the same kind of time off and whatever, and we're kind of back at it. But in my mind, I'm like, well, I'm making so much more salary than everybody else. I need to be working extra to sort of like earn my keep. And it put undue pressure on myself when I was bringing a lot of industry experience. Like I was bringing a lot of experience around the career side of things, around just the computer science side of things that some others on the team didn't have. And I wasn't giving myself value in that. And so it is important to recognize in yourself. And this is something that, like we talked a couple of weeks ago around mental health and how I was like going into therapy and like talking to a therapist about some of this stuff. And this is some of the stuff that I've been talking about with my therapist is like, I bring value to the team no matter what. And even right now, I'm like, why am I drawing a full salary? I got like one arm that I can type with, and I'm trying to do all this dictation software to try to like keep up with my workload. And I'm trying to find ways of like recording videos or recording audio and then transcribing it and whatever. Like it feels weird to draw a full salary when I don't have full use of everything. Like I can't even really lift this arm, going through physical therapy right now. And so the idea of like, you better live up to it or you better earn it. If the company hires you at a salary rate, you've already earned it. You are worth that money because they've hired you for that money, for that amount of money. You've earned it. So just go to work every day. Do what you set out to do. Do what they hired you to do. So, you better live up to, I think, can put a false sense of pressure on yourself. And I think you have to be careful with that. And this is a lesson, like I said, I've been doing this for 25 years and I just learned this lesson this year. You bring value no matter what. You're bringing value to the team. You're bringing value to the company. You have to recognize that. And so it doesn't mean you can slack off. It doesn't mean you just get to sit around and like watch Netflix and Hulu and, play video games all day if you're sort of working from home. Like, you need to actually be working. Like, let's be honest about that. But like, if you feel like you're a little bit behind or you feel like you're not as productive, like, that's okay. You still bring value to the company, and you have to recognize that in yourself and give yourself a little bit of grace around that. I don't want to like get on a big giant soapbox about this, but I think it's important just to point that out, that yes, you're earning your salary by doing your work every day, but you have to be careful not to put undue pressure on yourself because of the salary that you make, especially when you come from a background where, I mean, my jobs prior to getting out of college, I was making like maybe 15,000 a year, 20,000 a year. I get out of college and I'm making $30,000 a year. It's like, that was huge. It was a 50% pay bump. My first job out of college, literally I was making $30,000 working tech support at a tech company. And then my next job, I was suddenly making $55,000 or $50,000 at my next job. I'm like, whoa, I just went from 30K to 50K, like literally within the span of a couple of weeks. And it blew my mind. I'm like, I got to work so much more now because like I'm being paid double. I need to do twice as much work. So like recognizing all the way back through my career, I've been putting this pressure on myself that as I'm making more money, I should be earning that extra money. The company will see value in you. There's inherent value in the skill that we have as developers and as engineers. There's inherent value in that. And the company recognizes that if they are making you an offer and they are hiring you, it's because you're worth that money. So work at a good sort of pace, at a good balance, because you've already earned that money. So just go to work every day and do your job. Hopefully that helps. A CEO that I worked under in the past, he had an analogy where he talked about the rested racehorse. And his analogy was basically when you go to a horse race, I mean, the morality and ethics aside of like making animals compete and so on. But when you go to a horse race, they bring the animals out and they kind of walk them around the tracks. You kind of see them, and then it's go time. They run full tilt. But when the race is over, they don't sprint back to the stall. They kind of go back to that walking pace. And so his whole analogy of finding that sustainable pace is basically like, find your walking speed. And if you kind of draw the analogy to like just going for a walk, you can go for a walk, you can occasionally jog, you could sprint for a while, but eventually you got to go back to that walking speed, because you can walk indefinitely, but you can't sprint forever. You can't even jog forever. So if you can find that sustainable pace where you're putting in sort of what is a typical amount of work for yourself, understanding that in our tech industry, things kind of ebb and flow all the time, and things will get really busy and then it kind of lulls for a while, and then it'll get busy and it'll lull for a little while. Also, depending on the industry that you're in, if you're in like an e-commerce industry, things are going to start really heating up over the next month as people prepare for holiday spending or whatever. January and February come, retail spending drops significantly, and things in retail industry and in the tech sector get really quiet, and you don't have as much work to do. And so, it's going to kind of like go up and down as far as the amount of work to do. So if you can find that pace that you can maintain indefinitely, understanding that sometimes you're going to have to jog, sometimes you're going to have to run, but once that's over, you got to go back to that walking pace. You have to go back to that sustainable pace, because that's the only way you're going to sort of keep from, burning out, as we call it, or just like overexerting yourself to the point where it's affecting your health. You don't want that to happen, whether it's physical health or mental health. You don't want it to get to that point. And so you have to find that good sort of balance of pace of how much work can I do on a regular basis where I can just sustain that amount of work indefinitely. I can keep doing that same amount of work every day, day in, day out, 5 days a week, 9 to 5 or whatever. And that's it. I cut it off. I go find something else to do in life. I have a hobby, or I hang out with my wife and kids, whatever. I have something else to do, maybe live streaming or something like that. But you have other obligations in life. You have other things to do. Your work is not your life. Your work does not define you. And you do bring inherent value. You're already earning that. So just go do your job. Cool. I'm happy to take other questions in chat. I was expecting to wrap this up in an hour. Kind of went over a little bit. But hopefully that'll give you some ideas around like the idea of a compensation package and the kinds of things you can negotiate or not. So again, like really reading through the offer and trying to understand, like, would this be negotiable or not? Keeping in mind things like benefits packages, probably never going to be negotiable on an individual basis. Time off is probably not going to be negotiable. I have heard of people who negotiate for time off. What I did with my team, the last team that I was a manager over, I basically said, hey, like, we have unlimited PTO. And sometimes that can be a trap in the tech industry too, but sometimes it's a valid thing. But we had sort of unlimited PTO. But what I would do is I would say, like, if there's ever a time where you have to work extra because something happened, and you're working extra because we need you to work extra, not because you want to, but because we need you to work extra, then I want you to track those hours, and I'm going to give you comparable time off. That's not going to count towards PTO as if you took a day off. But like cumulatively over a week, if things happen and you bank up like 5-6 hours, I'm just going to give you a day off. And so sometimes those things can be just verbal kinds of negotiation things with your manager. That's not typically something that would get written into a job offer, but it is, sort of like an engineering culture kind of thing that may come into play. So you can talk about that stuff after you're hired and say, like, hey, if something comes up where, someone has to put in a lot of extra effort, is there like comp time for things like that? Because I don't want to take my PTO to recover from burnout if I got to stay up all night to fix something that broke or something like that. Every company is going to have slightly different policies around that kind of stuff. So you can ask about some of that during the interview. Some of it you can negotiate once you get the job, once you start the job. You can kind of negotiate that as part of engineering culture. But let's normalize talking about salary. Like, start talking about salary with your coworkers and be open and honest about, like, hey, I'm making X dollars. Are you making X dollars? Because we both come from similar backgrounds, similar experience levels. Do you feel like I'm overpaid? Do I feel like you're overpaid, underpaid? Like, have conversations about that, because that's the only thing that's going to help eliminate wage gap and make sort of wages more equitable for everybody. So typically, and I've quoted this stat before, typically white males will negotiate much harder and much stronger when they get a job offer than other genders and other like skin tones and other like ethnicities and so on based on that. So white males will negotiate the heck out of things. And so that can lead to the pay discrepancies that we see when we look at, sort of the pay gaps between genders and the pay gaps between nationalities and ethnicities and backgrounds and so on. It plays a big part in it. And like I said, if you don't advocate for yourself and negotiate for yourself, no one else is going to. No one else is going to say, well, because you didn't negotiate this, we're just going to like add this in, or we're going to like throw this in as a perk or something like that because you didn't negotiate for it. That's not going to happen. So you have to negotiate. Negotiation is expected in tech, so please negotiate when you get an offer. Cool. Let's take any last questions in chat, and then I think we'll wrap up for the night. So if you got anything else, appreciate everybody hanging out. Hope you got something tasty to drink. I kind of go back and forth between my Dr. Pepper and my watermelon mint hint water. Let me scroll back through chat just to see if I missed anything. That was just discussion around ISOs. So again, like, stock options are not a bad thing, but early in your career, they're not worth really spending the energy on. I would say, like, don't worry too much about equity when you're early in your career. If you've been in the industry 3+ years, then yeah, we could definitely have a conversation about equity and how it actually starts to really matter in your compensation package and signals to look for around, like, should you invest your money back into the company or not, that sort of thing. Cool. Well, I don't see any other questions coming in, so I think we'll wrap up. Appreciate everybody hanging out. Sunday. So this past Sunday, I was hoping to have someone on the stream named Lee. Didn't work out, but I think Lee's going to do the stream this Sunday. Lee has done way more interviewing than I have. He's been interviewing folks for like 20+ years, and so we're gonna kind of riff back and forth on some things and maybe do some resume reviews. So if you want to submit a resume review, let's see, we can do bang, resume. And so yeah, you can just go to the streaming page on techinterview.guide, and song request is now playing. I have no idea what that is. But for a resume review, just you can upload a PDF to me. Try to anonymize it unless you don't care about your contact information being out on the interwebs. But I recommend like anonymize your email, anonymize your phone number, maybe anonymize your last name, things like that if you don't want to be identified. Send me an anonymized resume, and we'll kind of give you some feedback on it on the stream on Sunday. Aside from that, stay safe. Hope everybody's doing well. Have a great night. Who should we go raid? Anybody have any suggestions for who to raid? None of the people that I follow are online right now. So who should we raid? Anybody got any ideas? Anybody got ideas? So starting tomorrow morning, I do recommend going and checking out Bob Ross, the company that owns all the Bob Ross videos. They do a Bob Ross stream every weekend, starting on Friday and going till Sunday night. So definitely good time for that. Cool. No raid suggestions either. All right. Well, we'll just wrap up, and we'll see y'all on Sunday. Have a good weekend, everyone. See ya.